The 19-year-old alien princess insulted the human, so he turned and left without a word. The red warning light hit my face before the alarm even finished its first scream. I had both hands deep inside the reactor housing of a world that was not my own, a tangle of glowing coolant lines above my head, and the whole chamber had just begun to shake under my boots. Dust drifted down from the ceiling in thin gray ribbons. Somewhere below me, a pressure valve let out a long, ugly hiss, the kind of sound that means a machine is about to make a decision you will not enjoy. My name is Owen Cole. I am a human engineer, and at that moment I was the only person in a room full of frightened aliens who knew exactly what was about to go wrong. "Step back from the core," I said, keeping my voice flat and even. "All of you, back to the wall now." The veiled technicians around me did not move. They stared at me with their wide silver eyes, tall and elegant and utterly useless in a crisis. They were good engineers in the way that a calm river is good water. They had never once been forced to think fast. Their civilization had been running on the same designs for thousands of years, and in all that time the machines had never truly threatened to fail. Until now. Until I arrived to find that the great power core of their capital world was rotting from the inside, and nobody had wanted to admit it. The floor lurched again. A panel near my shoulder flickered, showing numbers I did not like. I said, "Step back," I repeated. And this time I let a little iron into the words. That broke the spell. The technicians scrambled backward, their long limbs folding awkwardly as they pressed themselves against the far wall. I turned my full attention to the open housing. The coolant pressure was climbing toward a line it should never cross. If it crossed that line, the whole feeder system would seize, and the seizure would ripple outward into the main core, and a city of 40 million souls above our heads would go dark and cold in the time it takes to draw 3 breaths. I reached past a bundle of cables I did not recognize, found the manual bypass lever I had memorized from the schematics that morning, and hauled it down with everything my arms had. Metal groaned. The hiss climbed to a shriek. For one terrible second the pressure gauge kept rising, and I thought I had read it wrong, that I was about to be very embarrassed and also very dead. Then the needle stopped. It trembled at the edge of the red zone, and slowly, grudgingly, it began to fall. The shaking eased. The hiss died down to a whisper. The red warning light blinked twice and turned a soft, apologetic blue. I stood there a moment longer, breathing hard, my heart slamming against my ribs. Then I wiped my palms on my coveralls and turned around to face the technicians. They were staring at me as if I had pulled the sun out of the sky with my bare hands. "That bought us maybe 40 hours, I told them. "Maybe less. The core is failing, and what I just did was put a bandage on a wound that needs surgery. Do you understand me? This world is dying, and someone has been lying to your court about it for a very long time." None of them answered. They did not dare. Let me back up and explain how a man from Earth ended up saving an alien city before breakfast. Humanity had been part of the wider galaxy for only 11 years. To the ancient powers out among the stars, 11 years was nothing. We were the new arrivals. The small and short-lived creatures from a blue water world that nobody had bothered to notice until we noticed them first. The older species did not fear us, they did not respect us. Mostly they found us useful, in the way you might find a clever tool useful, without ever thinking of it as a partner. We did not have great fleets. We did not have weapons that could frighten anyone. What we had were people. We had engineers and doctors and builders and pilots who could look at a problem nobody else could solve and simply solve it, often by doing something so reckless and so direct that the older species would never have dreamed of trying it. The galaxy called us the help. They paid us in trade goods and technology, and they let us live on the edges of their grand civilization, and they were quietly certain that we would always know our place. I had spent 6 years learning their machines. I was, on paper, the best human reactor engineer alive, which is a strange thing to be best at, because it mostly means you are the person they call when something is about to explode and everyone else has given up. So when the Veilth Empire sent a request to Earth for our finest engineer, I was the one they put on the ship. The Veilth were old, older than old. Their empire had been shining across this corner of the galaxy, when humans were still chipping stones into spear points. Their capital world was a single endless city of silver towers and floating gardens, and the whole impossible thing was kept alive by the great core buried at its heart, the very machine I had just spent the morning fighting. I had arrived expecting a routine repair, a tune-up maybe, on a system that the Veilth themselves admitted they no longer fully understood. Instead, I had found a catastrophe wearing a polite mask. The core was decades past the point where any sane civilization would have rebuilt it. The court had been told that small adjustments would be enough. Whoever told them that had either been a fool or a coward, And either way, the result was the same. 40 million people were sitting on top of a slow disaster, and they had no idea. A chime sounded from the chamber doors. They slid open and a figure swept in surrounded by attendants. She was young, even for her species. You could see the youth in the way she carried herself, all sharp confidence and no caution. Her skin had the faint pearl shimmer that marked the royal bloodline, and her robes were the deep blue of the imperial house, threaded with silver that caught the light when she moved. She could not have been more than 19 of her people's years, which lined up close enough to 19 of ours. And she looked at the open reactor, and at the still trembling technicians, and at me standing there sweating in my plain gray coveralls, with an expression of pure, unbothered distaste. "This is the human," she said. It was not a question. It was the tone a person uses when they find something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of their shoe. One of her attendants leaned close and murmured something. Her silver eyes narrowed. "It stopped the noise," she said, gesturing at the now quiet core. "Good. The noise was disturbing the eastern gardens." She turned away, already losing interest. "See that it does not happen again." I said nothing. I had been around enough powerful people to know that the best response to a careless insult is often no response at all. I simply watched her, this child draped in the weight of an empire she clearly did not understand, and I filed the moment away. Her name, I would soon learn, was Ismera, Princess Ismera of the Veilth, heir to the imperial throne, raised from birth on the comfortable belief that the universe existed to serve her family, and that creatures like me existed to keep the lights on. She had never been told no. She had never failed at anything, because she had never been allowed near anything she might fail at, and she had absolutely no idea that the world she was standing on had less than 2 days of life left in it, unless I was given the freedom, the time, and the respect to save it. She paused at the door and looked back at me one more time. "You will report to the court tomorrow," she said. "My father wishes to see the creature that fixes machines. Try to be presentable." Then she was gone, her attendants flowing out behind her like a blue tide, and the great doors slid shut. The senior technician, a tall and trembling Veilth named Corin, crept toward me. "Honored human," he said, his voice low. "Please, you must not take offense at the princess. She is young, and she does not know how close we came just now. None of them do." I looked at him. He was older than the others, and there was real fear in his silver eyes. The fear of someone who understood the truth and had spent years being unable to say it out loud. "How long have you known?" I asked quietly. His head dropped. 3 years, he whispered. "I told my superiors. They told me to be silent. They said the core could not fail, because it had never failed, and that to suggest otherwise was to insult the Empire." He looked up at me, and I saw something close to despair. "You are the first person who has come here and not pretended. The first who looked at it and told the truth." I put a hand on his shoulder. It was a strange gesture between our two species, but he did not pull away. "Then we have work to do, you and I said, "and we do not have much time." I went to my quarters that night and did not sleep. Sat at the wide window of my borrowed room, looking out over a city of 40 million lights, every one of them belonging to a person who would never know how close they had just come, and I made my plans. I did not yet know that the next morning, in front of the entire imperial court, that careless 19-year-old princess was going to make a mistake that would change the way the whole galaxy looked at my species forever. I did not know that I was going to turn around and walk away. But the city kept shining beyond the glass, and somewhere far beneath it, the wounded core kept beating its slow and dying rhythm. And I sat there in the dark and waited for morning to come. The summons came an hour after the world's twin suns had risen, carried by a court official so stiff and formal that he seemed afraid his own face might crack if he smiled. He led me through corridors of white stone and silver light, past fountains that fell upward instead of down, past tall windows that looked out on gardens floating in the open sky. And the whole time I kept thinking about the numbers on that reactor gauge and the 40 hours, now closer to 30, that stood between this beautiful place and the dark. The throne hall was the largest room I had ever stood in. The ceiling vanished into a haze of soft light far above. Hundreds of Veilth nobles lined the walls, draped in silks and jewels, their silver eyes all turning toward me as I entered. I heard the whispers start at once. The human, the little creature, the one who fixes machines. They did not bother to lower their voices. Why would they? In their minds I could not possibly matter enough to be offended. At the far end of the hall, on a throne carved from a single block of pale blue crystal, sat the emperor. Tall Veilth was ancient even by the standards of his ancient people, his skin gone the color of old ivory, his eyes half closed as if the simple act of ruling had long ago become a kind of sleep. And at his right hand, standing tall and bright and certain, was Princess Ismara. I walked the long path between the rows of nobles. I did not hurry. I did not bow my head. I had been told before I came that the Veilth expected lesser species to enter the imperial presence on their knees, crawling the final stretch as a sign of respect. A human diplomat named Claire Bennett, who had spent 2 years among these people, had warned me about it on the ship. They will want you to grovel, she had told me. Do what you can stomach, Owen. But remember what you represent. You are not just one man in that room. You are the first impression a great many people will ever have of all of us. So I walked, upright, steady, and I felt the temperature of the room drop with every step, felt the whispers turn cold and sharp, felt the offense ripple through the crowd as the human refused to crawl. I stopped a respectful distance from the throne and gave a single, measured nod, the kind of nod one professional gives another. It was respect, but it was the respect of an equal, not the surrender of a servant. The Emperor's eyes opened a fraction. He studied me for a long, silent moment. You are the engineer, he said at last, his voice like wind through a dry canyon. You stopped the disturbance in the lower chamber yesterday. I stopped a reactor failure that would have ended your city, I said. I kept my voice respectful but clear, and I made sure it carried to the back of the hall. Your Majesty, your power core is failing, not in years, in days. The repair I made yesterday is temporary. I need to begin a full intervention immediately, and I need the full cooperation of your engineers and your court to do it. A murmur of outrage rolled through the nobles. To speak so plainly, to suggest that the Eternal Empire could fail, was apparently the worst kind of insult, but it was not the Emperor who answered me. It was Ismara. She stepped forward, and I watched her decide, in that moment, to put the rude little human in his place in front of everyone. I could see it happen behind her eyes. She was young, and she was eager to prove herself before the court that watched her every move. And here was an easy target. A creature half her height, from a world nobody respected, who had dared to walk into her father's hall without crawling. You forget yourself, animal, she said, and her voice rang out clear and cruel across the silent hall. And so it began. Animal, she said again, savoring the word, letting it hang in the air of the great hall where every noble of the empire could hear it. Do you imagine that, because you can tighten a bolt, you are permitted to lecture the throne of the Veilth? Do you think your clever little hands make you something other than what you are? I stood very still and said nothing. The lack of response only seemed to feed her. She came down a step from the platform, her silver-threaded robes whispering against the white stone, and the entire court leaned in to watch the heir to the empire teach a lesson and to a lesser creature. This was theater, I understood. This was performance, and I had been chosen, without my consent, to play the fool. Your kind crawled out of the mud 11 years ago. Ismara continued, her chin high, her voice carrying easily through the hushed room. 11 years. We have ruled the stars for longer than your sun has had spots on it. And you stand in my father's hall, upright, as though you were our equal. As though the work of your hands were a gift and not a duty. She let out a soft, cold laugh, and the nobles laughed with her, a glittering ripple of cruelty rolling along the walls. You are a trained animal, human, a useful beast, nothing more. We feed you, and you fix our machines, and you should be grateful for the privilege of serving a civilization as great as ours. Somewhere behind me, I heard a soft sound of distress. It was Corin, the old technician, who had been allowed into the back of the hall and who knew, as I knew, exactly what was hanging over all their heads. He understood, the princess did not. I still said nothing. But I was listening and I was watching, and inside the quiet of my own mind I was beginning to understand something important about this girl. She was not truly evil. I had met evil, and this was not it. This was something more ordinary and more sad. She was a child who had never once been told that she was wrong. She had been raised inside a beautiful lie, told from birth that her family was the center of all things, and that creatures like me existed only to serve. She believed it the way you believe the ground is solid. It had simply never occurred to her that it might not be true. But understanding her did not change what she was doing, and it did not change what I had to do. Now, Ismara said, and her tone shifted into something even uglier, the tone of someone who has decided to enjoy themselves. Since you seem confused about your station, let me make it simple. You will kneel. You will press your forehead to the floor of this hall, as is proper for a servant in the imperial presence, and you will beg, in words the court can hear, for the honor of being permitted to serve the empire that was kind enough to lift your muddy little species out of the dark. She smiled, and it was a beautiful, terrible beg me, animal. Beg, and perhaps I will allow you to keep your tools. The hall went utterly silent. Hundreds of silver eyes fixed on me, hungry to see the human break, to see me drop to my knees and grovel for the amusement of the court. Even the ancient emperor on his crystal throne had opened his eyes fully now, watching with mild distant interest, as if he were observing the behavior of an insect. I let the silence stretch, and then I did the only thing that made any sense to me. I bent down slowly and without any drama, and I picked up the small tool case I had set at my feet when I entered. I checked the latch to make sure it was closed. I straightened up, and I looked at Princess Ismera, heir to the Empire of the Veilth, one last time, with no anger in my face and no fear. Only a calm and complete finality. Then I turned around and I walked away. I did not say a word, I did not explain. I did not threaten or argue or plead. I simply turned my back on the throne of the Veilth, on the cruel young princess and her glittering court, and I walked the long path back toward the great doors at the far end of the hall, my footsteps the only sound in all that vast silence. The silence was the thing. I understood that even as it happened, a speech, an outburst, a clever insult thrown back at her, any of those things would have given them what they wanted. It would have made me a participant in their game, a thing reacting to their power. But to simply leave, calmly, without a single word, was to tell them all that they did not have power over me at all, that their grand hall and ancient bloodline and the laughter of 1,000 nobles meant nothing, because I had somewhere more important to be, and they were not worth the breath it would take to answer. Behind me, the laughter had stopped completely. I could feel the confusion spreading through the room like a cold wind. This was not in the script. The animal was supposed to grovel. The animal was supposed to break. The animal was not supposed to simply gather its tools and leave as if the heir to the empire were not worth the time of day. Where? Ismera's voice rang out, and for the first time there was something uncertain underneath the anger. Where do you think you are going? I did not dismiss you. Human. Human, I am speaking to you. You will stop. You will turn around and you will kneel. Stop. Stop walking. I command you to stop. I did not stop. I did not turn around. I reached the great doors. They were closed, and for one moment I wondered if they would refuse to open for me, if I would be trapped there in the silence, with the whole court staring at my back. But there were 2 Veilth guards stationed at the doors, and as I approached, the older of the 2, after a heartbeat of hesitation, reached out and touched the panel that opened them. The doors slid apart. I heard, behind me, the sharp intake of breath from 100 nobles as they realized the guard had let me go. I heard Ismera's voice rise, no longer commanding now but something closer to disbelief, calling after me, but I had already stopped listening to the words. They did not matter anymore. I walked through the doors and out into the bright morning beyond. And behind me, slowly, with a deep and final sound, the great doors of the throne hall slid shut. Out in the corridor, the formal official who had brought me there was waiting, and his stiff face had gone slack with shock. He had heard everything. He stared at me as if I were a ghost or a madman or both. You, he stammered. You cannot, the princess, the emperor. You cannot simply walk out of the imperial presence. It is not done. It has never been done. In 10,000 years it has never been done. It's been done now, I said. I started down the corridor, back toward my quarters, back toward the small human enclave that had been set aside for us at the edge of the palace district. My heart was beating fast, but my hands were steady. I had just done something that I knew, even in that moment, was either going to be the smartest decision of my life, or the last one. Because here was the truth that the princess did not understand, the truth that her ancient and arrogant empire had forgotten somewhere in its thousands of years of comfort. That dying reactor at the heart of their world did not care about bloodlines. It did not care about thrones or titles or the proper way to address royalty. It was a wounded machine counting down toward a catastrophe, and there was exactly one person on that entire world who could stop it. And that person had just been called an animal and ordered to grovel. And that person had just walked away. Claire Bennett, the diplomat, was waiting for me when I reached the human enclave. She took one look at my face and her own went pale. Owen, she said carefully. What happened in there? I set down my tool case. The princess asked me to beg, I said, in front of the whole court. She called me an animal and ordered me to crawl. Claire closed her eyes for a moment. And what did you do? I picked up my tools, I said, and I left, without a word. She was quiet for a long moment. When she opened her eyes again, there was something complicated in them, fear and pride mixed together. Do you understand what you just did? She asked softly. Do you understand what's going to happen now? I understand exactly what I did, I told her. I refuse to be their animal. And as for what happens now, that depends entirely on how badly they need their world to keep breathing. I looked out the window, toward the silver towers and the floating gardens, and the 40 million people who had no idea. Because that core is still dying, Claire. and the only person who can save it just walked out of their throne hall. So now we wait, and we find out what they value more, their pride or their lives. The first thing that happened was nothing, and that nothing was the most powerful thing of all. I expected guards. I expected to be dragged back, perhaps in chains, hauled before the Emperor to answer for my unforgivable rudeness. That was how the older species dealt with creatures who forgot their place. So I sat in the human enclave and I waited for the doors to burst open, and I prepared myself calmly for whatever was coming, but no one came. An hour passed, then two, then the whole long afternoon. The twin suns crossed the sky and began to sink toward the silver horizon, and still no one came for me. And in the quiet of that waiting I understood why. They were confused. The entire imperial court, 10,000 years of certainty and tradition, had no idea what to do. Their rules covered every possible situation except this one. A lesser creature had defied the throne, and the proper response was to punish it. But the lesser creature was also the only thing standing between their world and total darkness. And so to punish it, to harm it, to so much as raise a voice against it, was to risk killing 40 million people. They were caught between their pride and their survival, and they had frozen completely, like a machine given two commands that cancel each other out. So I made my decision. If they would not come to me, I would not go to them. I would not crawl back to apologize. I had done nothing wrong. I had told the truth, refused to be insulted, and walked away with my dignity intact. The next move was theirs. I sent one message through Claire Bennett to the Imperial Court. It was short, and it was professional. It said that the human engineering team stood ready to begin the full repair of the core the moment we were formally requested to do so, as equals and as guests, with the cooperation and respect owed to those entrusted with saving a world. It did not mention the insult. It did not demand an apology. It simply laid out the terms of professional work, the way I would have laid them out for anyone, anywhere. And then I waited some more. That night, the world reminded everyone of what was truly at stake. It started just after the second moon rose. The lights of the great city flickered, all of them at once, a stutter in the endless glow that had not changed in 1,000 years. From the window of the enclave I watched it happen, watched the silver towers blink like frightened eyes, and I felt my stomach tighten because I knew exactly what it meant. The core was slipping. The temporary repair I had made was already beginning to fail, faster than I had hoped, and the wounded machine at the heart of the world was sliding toward the edge. The lights steadied after a few seconds, but I had seen the truth in that flicker, and so I suspected had a great many other people. Corin, the old technician, reached me through a side channel just before dawn. His voice was thin with exhaustion and fear. "Honored Owen," he said, "the core. It flickered tonight. The whole city saw it. The court is in chaos. They sent our own engineers down to stabilize it, and they tried. They did everything they knew how to do, but it is not enough. They do not understand the damage the way you do. They patched it, barely, but the next failure will be worse, and the one after that worse still." He paused, and I heard him swallow. "They are frightened now, all of them. The Emperor has not slept. And the princess." He hesitated. "The princess sits in the lower observation chamber and looks at the core through the window and says nothing to anyone." "Good," I said quietly. "Let them be frightened. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. You must come back." Corin pleaded. "Please, the world is dying. Whatever pride is between you and the court, the people, the 40 million, they did nothing to you. They do not deserve to die for the princess's cruelty." It was the right argument. It was the only argument that could have moved me, and I think Corin knew it. Because he was right. The people of the city had not insulted me. They were sleeping in their beds, going about their lives, raising their children, completely unaware that their world was failing beneath them. My quarrel was with the court, not with them. "I will come back," I told him, "but not to crawl. I will come back to work as an equal when the court asks me properly, not before. Tell no one I said this. Let them arrive at the answer on their own. It will mean more if they do." I ended the call and sat in the gray light of the coming dawn, and I waited for the Empire to decide what it valued more. The decision, when it came, did not come from the Emperor. It came from the princess. It was the third day. The core had flickered twice more, each time longer than the last, each time sending a wave of quiet terror through the city. The court had thrown every engineer it had at the problem, and accomplished nothing but to delay the inevitable by hours. And then, late on the third day, Claire Bennett came to my room with a strange expression on her face and a data crystal in her hand. "A private message came through for you," she said. "Not through the court. Not official at all. It came through a personal channel, the kind only the royal family can use." She set the crystal down on the table in front of me. Owen, it's from her, from the princess. And it's not a command, it's not a summons. She paused. It's a question. I looked at the crystal for a long moment. Then I activated it. There was no royal seal, no formal greeting, no demand. The message was short, and it had clearly not been written by an advisor or a scribe. The words were raw and uncertain in a way I had not expected from her. You walked away. The message read, everyone walks toward me. Everyone bows. Everyone begs. Everyone wants something from me and they all bend to get it. You are the only one who has ever simply turned and left, as though I were nothing, as though my command meant nothing. There was a pause in the recording, a long breath. I do not understand it. I have thought about nothing else for 3 days. So I am asking you, not commanding you, asking you. Why did you not say anything? Why did you not argue, or shout, or beg, or even hate me? Why did you only turn and leave without a single word? I need to understand. Please. The message ended. I sat there in the quiet of my room and I felt something shift, because this small and uncertain question from a frightened 19-year-old, was not the act of a tyrant. It was the act of a person beginning, for the very first time, to suspect that the lie she had been raised inside might be a lie after all. It was a crack in the wall, and through that crack, just maybe, something true might be able to grow. Claire was watching me. Are you going to answer her? Yes, I said slowly, but carefully. This is the most important conversation of this whole disaster, and she doesn't even know it yet. I thought for a long time about what to write, and then I recorded my answer, and I sent it back through the same private channel, and I made it as honest as I knew how. You ask why I said nothing, I told her. I will tell you the truth, since you asked for it honestly. I said nothing because there was nothing to say. You had already decided what I was before I ever opened my mouth. You decided I was an animal, a tool, a thing that exists to serve you. And when a person has already decided what you are, no words you say will change their mind. Words are for people who are willing to listen. You were not willing to listen. So I did not waste them. I paused, choosing the next part with great care. I did not shout because I was not afraid of you. I did not argue because I had nothing to prove to you. I did not beg because I have never begged for anything in my life, and I was not going to start in your father's hall. And I did not hate you, princess, because hate is a heavy thing to carry, and you were not worth the weight. Another pause. I turned and left because I respect myself. That is all. Not because I held you in contempt, but because I refuse to be made small by anyone, no matter how tall their throne. That is a human thing. Where I come from, dignity cannot be commanded. It can only be earned, and it can only be given freely. You tried to take mine, so I took it back, and I left. I sent the message before I could second-guess it. The reply came faster than I expected, within the hour. And it was 3 words long. I want to understand, it said, and I knew, reading those 3 small words, that the wall had cracked a little wider, that somewhere in that beautiful, terrible palace, a young woman who had never once been told she was wrong was beginning, slowly and painfully, to learn. But the core was still dying, and whatever was happening between the princess and me, however important it might turn out to be, the clock was still running down. So I sent one more message, the practical one, the one that mattered most of all. Then let us understand each other, I wrote. But there is no time for slow lessons. Your world has hours, not days. I will tell you everything I know and everything I am, and you will tell me what I need to do my work. But first, your court must request my help properly, as an equal, as a guest, not as an animal. Make that happen and I will save your world. Refuse, and your pride will be the most expensive thing in the history of your empire. I waited, and far away in the lower observation chamber, looking out through the great window at the wounded heart of her dying world, Princess Yuzmera of the Veilth made the first truly difficult decision of her sheltered life. She came to me herself. That was the first surprise. I had expected, at best, a formal request from the court, delivered by some trembling official, full of careful language designed to ask for my help without quite admitting that they needed it. Instead, late on the morning of the 4th day, the door of the human enclave opened, and Princess Yuzmera walked in alone. She had come without her attendants, without her glittering court, without the silver-threaded robes of state. She wore a simple traveling cloak, gray and plain, and she had pulled the hood back from her face. And standing there in the doorway of our small enclave she looked, for the first time, like exactly what she was. A young woman, frightened and uncertain, far from the safety of everything she had ever known. Claire Bennett rose from her seat in alarm. To have the heir to the empire walk unannounced into the human quarters was so far outside protocol that there was no protocol for it at all. Your Highness, Claire began. We were not informed. We are not prepared to receive. I did not come to be received, Yuzmera said. Her voice was quieter than it had been in the throne hall. The cruel music had gone out of it. I came to speak with him. Her silver eyes found me where I sat at the work table, and I saw her struggle for a moment with something that did not come easily to her. Alone, if he will permit it. Claire looked at me. I nodded. She gathered her things and stepped out, but I noticed she did not go far, and I did not blame her. For a moment the princess and I simply looked at each other across the small room. She had braced herself for something. I could see. She had spent the journey here building up her defenses, expecting me to gloat, to throw her cruelty back in her face, to enjoy the sight of an imperial princess come crawling at last, and she found none of it. I simply gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit," I said. "You look tired." She sat. She seemed almost confused by the ordinary kindness of it. "You are not what I expected," she said at last. "Neither are you," I told her. 3 days ago you called me an animal in front of your whole court, and now here you are, alone, in the home of the people you despise, with no guards and no crown. That takes a kind of courage I did not think you had." Her chin lifted. An old habit, the reflex of a princess who has been challenged. But then, slowly, it lowered again, and something honest crept into her face. "I have thought about your words for 3 days," she said. "About dignity that cannot be commanded. About respect that must be earned and given freely. I have never heard anyone speak that way. In my whole life, no one has ever spoken to me as you did. They tell me what I want to hear. They bow and they smile and they agree with everything I say, and I always believed it was because I was worthy of it. Because I was a princess of the Veilth, and the universe was ordered correctly, with my family at the top and the lesser species below." She looked down at her hands. "But you would not bow, and it has made me wonder, for the first time, whether they bow because I am worthy of it, or only because they are afraid. And if it is fear, then—" She stopped. "Then I have never been respected at all. Not once in my whole life. I have only been obeyed." It was, I thought, a remarkably honest thing for her to say, and a remarkably sad one. "That is the beginning of wisdom," I told her gently. "Most people who have power never figure that out. They go their whole lives mistaking fear for love and obedience for respect, and they die having never once been truly seen. You are 19 and you are already asking the question. That is more than I expected." "Then teach me," she said, and there was a fierce hunger in it. "Teach me what your people know that mine have forgotten. You came from a world that crawled out of the mud 11 years ago, and yet you walked into my father's hall and you would not kneel, and 3 days later it is the empire that has come to you. How? What do your people have that mine do not?" I considered the question seriously, because it deserved a serious answer. "We die," I said. She blinked. "What?" I said again, quickly. "By your standards, a human life is the blink of an eye. 80 years, 90 if we are lucky. Your people live for thousands. And I think that has made you forget the value of time, the value of a single day, the value of a single choice. When you have forever, nothing matters very much because there is always more time to fix it later. But we do not have forever. Every choice we make knowing the clock is running out. Every kindness, every act of courage, every refusal to bow, we do it knowing we will not get another chance. That is what makes us fierce. Not strength, not weapons, we have neither. What we have is the knowledge that our time is short and precious. And so we refuse to waste a single moment of it being small, or afraid, or anyone's animal." I leaned forward. "When you called me an animal and ordered me to grovel, you were asking me to spend a piece of my short life on my knees, for nothing. And I would rather die standing than live a single hour on my knees. That is the human thing, princess. That is what your people have forgotten, that a life worth living is worth more than a long one." She was very still. Her silver eyes were bright, and I realized with some surprise that she was close to tears. "My father is dying," she said suddenly. The words seemed to come out of her without permission. "That is the truth no one speaks. He is old even for us, and he is failing. And soon I will be empress, and I am not ready. I have never done anything. I have never been allowed to do anything. They kept me wrapped in silk and surrounded by people who tell me I am perfect. And the whole time the world has been quietly falling apart beneath us, and I did not even know." Her voice cracked. "I called you an animal because it made me feel large, because I am so very frightened of how small I am. And you turned and walked away, and you showed me without saying a word exactly how small I truly am. I have hated you for it for 3 days, and I think, somewhere underneath the hating, I have also been grateful, because you are the only person who has ever told me the truth." And there it was, the whole of her, laid bare. Not a tyrant, not a monster, a frightened girl who had been failed by everyone who was supposed to prepare her, handed an empire she did not understand, and taught to fill her fear with cruelty because cruelty was the only power she had ever been shown. I felt the anger I had carried for 3 days drain out of me, And in its place came something more useful. Because I understood now that I was not just dealing with a dying reactor. I was dealing with a dying empire, and a young woman who might, if she was given the chance and the truth, become the one to save it. Not just the machine. The whole rotten, beautiful, frightened thing. All right, I said. Then let us make a deal, you and I, not princess and animal, not master and servant. Two people, each with something the other needs. I held out my hand, palm up, the human gesture of agreement. You need your world saved, and you need to learn how to be the kind of ruler who deserves to save it. I can give you both. But in return, the Empire treats my people as equals. Full partners, not the help, not trained beasts. Equals, with all the respect that word demands, forever, starting now. Do we have an agreement? She looked at my outstretched hand for a long moment. She knew what it meant. She knew that to take it was to break with 10,000 years of how her people saw the universe. To declare in front of her dying father and her glittering court that the lesser species were lesser no longer. It would cost her. It would cost her enormously. But she had seen the flicker in the city lights. She had felt the world shaking beneath her. And she had learned, in 3 short days, the most important lesson of her life. She took my hand. Her grip was firm, and her eyes were steady. And when she spoke, her voice had found something new in it. Something that had not been there before. Not the cruelty of the throne hall. Something stronger. Something that might, in time, become the strength of a real ruler. We have an agreement, Princess Ismera said. Now save my world, Owen Cole, and teach me how to be worthy of it. I stood and I gathered my tools, and for the first time since I had arrived on that beautiful dying world, I smiled. Then let's not waste another minute, I said, because by my count, we have less than 10 hours before your core fails for good, and I am going to need your help to stop it. The shock on her face was almost worth everything that had come before. My help, she said. I am no engineer. What could I possibly do? You can do the one thing no engineer in this empire can do, I told her, already heading for the door. You can give an order that everyone will obey, and you can stand beside me while we do the impossible, so that when it is done, your people will know that the heir to the empire got her hands dirty saving them. That is worth more than any repair. Now come on. Your world is waiting, and the clock is running out. She rose, and she pulled her hood back up, and she followed me out into the bright morning. The princess and the human, walking side by side toward the wounded heart of a dying world. Behind us, in the doorway, Claire Bennett watched us go with an expression I will never forget. It was the look of someone who has just watched history turn on its hinge. We reached the core chamber with 9 hours left, and the moment I saw it, I knew we were in worse trouble than even I had feared. The temporary repair I had made on the first day had given out completely. The Veilth engineers had tried to hold the line, and they had bought a little time. But the great machine at the heart of the world was now sliding fast toward total collapse. The coolant lines were running far too hot. The pressure was climbing toward the red line and refusing to come down. And worst of all, the central regulation system, the brain of the whole reactor, was beginning to fail in a way I had only ever read about, never seen. If that brain shut down before we could replace it, the core would not simply stop. It would tear itself apart and take the city with it. Corin met us at the entrance, and when he saw who was beside me, his silver eyes went wide. Your Highness, he stammered, dropping into a deep bow. I did not. Stand up, Corin, Ismera said, and to his astonishment she used his name. There is no time for bowing. Tell us everything. What followed were the most difficult 9 hours of my life. I had repaired failing reactors before, but never one this large, this old, or this far gone. And I had never done it with a clock counting down toward the death of a city. Corin and his technicians worked beside me, and to their credit, once they were freed from the fear that had silenced them for years, they worked like people possessed. They knew this machine. They had simply never been allowed to admit it was broken. Now, with permission to finally tell the truth, they became exactly the engineers their world needed. And Ismera did something I will never forget. The Princess of the Veilth, heir to the throne, who had called me an animal 4 days earlier, took off her cloak, rolled up the sleeves of her plain gray tunic, and asked me what she could do. I told you I am no engineer, she said. But I have 2 hands and I can follow instruction. Use me. So I used her. I had her hauling coolant conduits when we needed extra hands. I had her relaying my orders to the technicians on the far side of the chamber, her royal voice cutting through the chaos and making sure everyone moved the instant I needed them to. And as the hours passed, I watched the court nobles who had come down to observe, expecting to see the human fail, fall silent one by one, as they realized that their princess was kneeling in the grease and the heat beside a creature she had once ordered to grovel, working with her own hands to save them all. The hardest moment came with 3 hours left. The central regulation system finally failed. All at once, every screen in the chamber went dark, and the deep, steady hum of the core began to climb in pitch toward a scream. The pressure spiked. The temperature soared. We had minutes, not hours, and the brain of the machine was dead. The Veilth engineers froze. Even Corin froze. This was the disaster they had feared for years. Finally arriving, and there was nothing in all their thousands of years of careful tradition that told them what to do. But I had spent 6 years learning to do the thing no one else would try. We bypass it. I shouted over the rising scream of the core. We cut the dead brain out entirely, and we run the regulation by hand, manual control, all of us. Right now. That is impossible, one of the senior engineers cried. No one can regulate a core of this size by hand. The calculations, the timing, it cannot be done by living minds. It can be done by living minds that refuse to die, I snapped. Corin, get your best people on the coolant valves. Watch my hand signals. When I drop my fist, you open them, all together, exactly together, Ismera. You are my voice. You stand where everyone can see you, and you call the rhythm I give you. We are going to be the brain this machine no longer has. Now move, all of you, move. And we did it. For the longest 40 minutes of my life, a room full of aliens and one human became the living mind of a dying machine. I read the pressure and the heat by feel and by instinct, the way you learn to do after years of this work, and I gave the rhythm to Ismera, and she called it out in a clear, strong voice that never once wavered. And Corin and his people opened and closed the great valves in perfect time, sweat pouring down their faces, hands blistering on the hot metal, never stopping, never faltering. The core screamed and fought us. Twice it surged toward collapse, and twice we caught it by a margin so thin I do not like to think about it. My arms burned. My voice went raw. Beside me, Ismera's royal robes were soaked through with sweat and streaked with grime. And she did not so much as glance at them. She had found something in herself down there in the heat and the danger, something that all the silken ceremony of her whole life had never given her. She had found out what she was made of, and it turned out she was made of strong stuff after all. In the final minutes, as we fought to bring the new regulation system online and take the burden off our exhausted hands, the core surged one last time, the worst of all, a wave of heat and pressure that should have ended everything. I saw it coming a half second before it hit, and I knew we did not have the hands to catch it, that we were one person short, that this was the moment it all came apart. And then Ismera was beside me, throwing her weight against the manual override I could not reach in time, her hands closing over the lever, hauling it down with a cry of effort. The surge broke against our combined strength. The pressure fell. The new system caught and held, and the deep scream of the core faded, second by second, back down into a low and steady and healthy hum. We had done it. For a long moment no one moved. We simply stood there in the sudden quiet, soaked and burned and shaking, staring at the gauges that now read safe, green, stable, alive. 40 million people sleeping in their beds above us would never know how close they had come. They would wake the next morning to a world that simply kept on shining, and they would have no idea that it had nearly ended, and that it had been saved by a princess and a human working side by side in the dark. Ismera turned to me. Her face was filthy and exhausted and streaked with tears, and she was in that moment more truly a ruler than she had ever been on any throne. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. You did it, I told her, and I meant it. You caught the last surge. I could not reach it. If you had hesitated, even for a heartbeat, we would all be gone. You saved your world, Ismera, with your own hands. She looked at her hands, blistered and black with grime, and then she looked up at me, and something passed between us that needed no words at all. The reckoning with the court came 2 days later. After we had all slept and the core had run perfectly steady for 48 straight hours, and the danger was truly past, the Emperor summoned the full court to the throne hall, and this time I walked in beside Princess Ismera, and this time no one whispered animal. The nobles who had laughed at me stood in silence, because they all knew now. Word had spread of what had happened in the core chamber. They knew that the human they had mocked had saved every one of their lives, and that their own princess had labored beside him to do it. Tall Veilth, ancient and failing, looked down from his crystal throne at the human standing in his hall, upright as ever, refusing as ever to kneel. And this time, the old emperor did something no emperor of the Veilth had ever done in 10,000 years. He inclined his head. To me. A small bow, but a real one, given freely. Owen Cole of Earth, he said, his dry voice carrying through the silent hall. My daughter has told me everything. How you found the rod in our world that our own pride had hidden. How you refused to be made small, and how that refusal woke us from a sleep we did not know we were in. And how you saved 40 million of my people. asking nothing for yourself but that we treat your kind as equals." He paused, and his ancient eyes moved slowly across the assembled court. "For 10,000 years we have called the younger species lesser. We were wrong. A creature is not made great by the length of its life or the age of its bloodline. It is made great by what it does with the time it has. And this human, in the span of a single week, has done more for this empire than most of us will do in 1,000 years." His gaze returned to me. "From this day the humans of Earth are no longer the help of the Veilth. They are our partners, our equals, our friends. Let it be written, and let it be so across all the worlds we hold." A murmur ran through the court, but it was not outrage now. It was something closer to awe, and I understood that the story of this week would travel. It would spread from world to world, from species to species. The tale of the human who walked away from an empress and would not kneel, and who then turned around and saved her world anyway. It would change forever the way the galaxy looked at my small and short-lived and stubborn people. Ismera stepped forward then, and she addressed the court in a voice that had grown, in a single week, from the cruel music of a spoiled child into the clear, strong tone of a true ruler. "My father has named the truth," she said, "and I will add my own. 1 week ago I stood in this hall and I called this man an animal. I ordered him to grovel for my amusement, and he turned, and he walked away without a single word. And in doing so he taught me more than all my tutors taught me in 19 years. He taught me that respect cannot be commanded, only earned. He taught me that a throne is not worth anything if the people who bow to it do so only from fear. And he taught me that a short life lived with courage is worth more than a long one lived in comfort." She turned to face me, and before the entire court the heir to the empire of the Veilth bowed to a human, deep and unashamed. "I was wrong, Owen Cole. I am sorry. And I am grateful. Thank you for not letting me remain the small and frightened thing I was." I returned the bow, equal to equal, and the whole court watched it happen, and the whole galaxy would soon hear of it. I stayed on for another month, overseeing the full rebuild of the core, and training the Veilth engineers to maintain it properly. Corin became the chief engineer of the capital world, a position he held with honor for the rest of his long life, and he never again let anyone tell him to be silent about the truth. Claire Bennett negotiated the new partnership between Earth and the Veilth, the first treaty in history in which an ancient power dealt with humanity as a full equal, and it became the model for many more that followed. And Ismera changed. Her father passed away peacefully 2 months later, and she became empress, and she ruled in a way no Veilth ruler ever had. She treated every species, great and small, ancient and young, with the respect she had learned in the heat of that core chamber. She got her hands dirty. She told the truth even when it cost her, and she became, in time, the most beloved ruler in the long history of her people. The empress who woke the empire from its long and arrogant sleep. On the day I finally left to return to Earth, she came to see me off at the spaceport, no longer a frightened girl playing at being cruel, but a young empress finding her strength. She walked with me to my ship, and at the foot of the ramp she stopped. "I will never forget what you did for me," she said. "Not for my world, for me. You could have crawled that day. It would have been easier. You could have shouted, or hated me, or thrown my cruelty back in my face. Instead, you simply walked away, and you gave me the one thing no one had ever given me before, the truth." She smiled, and it was a real smile now, warm and human in everything but shape. "Will I see you again, Owen Cole? The galaxy is wide, Your Majesty," I said, "and reactors are always breaking somewhere. I expect our paths will cross again." "I hope they do," she said softly. "I have a great deal more to learn, and you are the best teacher I have ever had." I climbed the ramp into my ship. At the top, I turned and looked back one last time, at the young empress standing alone on the platform, at the silver towers of the city rising behind her, at the world that had so nearly died and had been given back its future. And I thought about the long road that had brought us here, from a cruel word in a throne hall to a bow given freely before the whole court, and I understood something that I have carried with me ever since. I never had to win the argument. I never had to prove that I was strong, or clever, or worthy. I only ever had to refuse to lose myself, to stand upright when they told me to kneel, to walk away rather than become the small thing they wanted me to be. That was all. And it turned out that was enough. It turned out that was everything. Because that is the human thing. The thing the ancient and arrogant powers of the galaxy had forgotten across all their thousands of years of comfort. Our lives are short. Our time is precious, and we will never spend a single hour of it on our knees. The ramp closed, the engines woke, and I rose up through the bright sky of a world I had helped to save, carrying with me the memory of a princess who had learned the hardest way of all, what it truly means to be worthy of a crown. And far below, the great city kept on shining, just as it always had, just as it always would, and not one of its 40 million people would ever know how close they had come, or how a single human, called an animal and ordered to grovel, had simply turned and walked away, and changed the shape of the galaxy